Welcome to the Game Changers podcast, where we sit down with leaders and innovators reshaping the way we live, work, and think about the future. Today, we're taking on one of the most urgent questions in technology. What does justice look like in artificial intelligence? My guest today is Christian Ortiz, also known as ZacaTechO, Afro-Indigenous technologist, social scientist, and the creator of Justice AI and the DIA framework. Christian is pioneering a movement for decolonized ethical intelligence, building AI that doesn't just perform better, but remembers better, honoring culture, history, and humanity in the process. We'll explore how he's blending ancestral wisdom, social science, and technology to build a future where AI doesn't replicate harm, it creates liberation. So, stepping right in here, Christian, pleasure to have you on the show. Let's talk a little bit about what I like to call the revolution to reimagination. You come from a revolutionary lineage, the great grandson of the legendary Pancho Villa, and you've actually said that your work continues that legacy through code and education. How does that history shape your mission today? Let's start there.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Roy. Honestly, it's a pleasure being here, and thank you for that question. It's very important introduction into what it is that I do. As a couple of years ago, through Ancestry DNA, it connected me with my great grandfather, Pancho Villa, who, according to our family, was just like he may have been related to us. We weren't really sure. Um, and so, thanks to technology, we got to deep dive into that and see the legacy he left behind for the Mexican people, during the Mexican Revolutionary War and the war against, the states and all of the things. Um, you know, for me, I entered activism at a later stage in my life, and I didn't really understand why I felt so compelled to do the work that I do, why it mattered so much to me when it seemed like it didn't matter as much to those around me. So I felt kind of like, what is going on here? Why is it that this is like such a calling? And so when we look at scientifically of how these moments in time transfer through generations, I truly believe that there's something inside of me that I and my father carry when it comes to social justice, where I look at it like I'm literally in the trenches of a revolution, but instead of course using muskets, we're using code because this is where we're at right now. We're fighting the same systems that he was fighting, and so I look at it that way, kind of as this newer generation of adding to the fight in a different way, but fighting the same systems that he was fighting, which is pretty cool in the terms of how it connects us historically and generationally.
It is, it is. I completely agree with you. We are pretty much in a revolution. So, with that in mind, what was the moment you realized AI wasn't just a technology problem, but a justice problem?
Yeah. So, doing my work with social justice, um, I started my entrepreneurial journey back in 2019, right before COVID. And
Mhm.
I had the opportunity to blend both my activism and my entrepreneurship into one, creating ethical marketing plans for small businesses right before the pandemic. And my work led me into doing beta testing for Chat with 3.5 back in November 22. Before OpenAI released ChatGPT to the world, they were selecting 50 people every day to do beta testing, and I have no idea how they got a hold of my name, but I'm grateful that they did. And so I realized, speaking to this AI almost immediately, how biased it was, just speaking from a brown man's perspective, an indigenous perspective, an activist perspective. It had no idea what I was saying whatsoever. And so immediately told me, like, I need to deep dive into this. I need to see what's being said about it. I want to see who are the pioneers talking about bias in AI. Come to find out, there were many. There have been many people for years talking about this. And so I realized that bias, like in real life, manifests in many different forms and ways. And so, from facial recognition to Dr. Joy Bellamwini's discovery through that, through bias in how sinks and napkin dispensers or paper towel dispensers in bathrooms don't read darker pigments, right? Like if you people who ever wondered our dark brothers and sisters who've put their hands under the sink. The sink doesn't work, but you turn it to the light color side, and all of a sudden the water comes out. And then same thing with language models. You get to see ChatGPT and all of these language models give you a very neutral answer when it comes to social justice
Hmm.
and to oppression. And so it doesn't really get to the root cause of systemic racism, and almost it intentionally doesn't list it, because of course then they would admit that we have a problem. And so it led me ultimately down to this question of how can I build one that doesn't do that. And going down that rabbit hole took me about 2 years to connect with over 560 decolonial specialists to put something together to finally make that happen.
Awesome. I applaud the work. You describe yourself as a decolonial social scientist and technologist. For those that are new to the lens, what does decolonizing technology really mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm at the precipice. I'm at the intersection, rather, of decoloniality, social science, and technology. And so I'm a social scientist in nature through my education, but I'm also a decolonial social scientist, where I've adopted decoloniality through critical race theory and all of these different types of studies that take helps me take a look at the world before colonization. Then I take a look at what colonization stripped away from every single one of us, whether we've been racialized as white, black, indigenous, or whatever the case may be. And then I study how colonization manifests within us systemically today. And so it kind of helps me help people connect the dots into the systems that we've inherited that we didn't ask for through colonization. People think that colonization was ancient and it was just years ago and it doesn't exist anymore. But what they don't realize is that colonization created these systems in which we see each other as humans today. And so it's responsible for our anti LGBTQ ideologies, our patriarchy, our misogyny, our sexism, our racism, all of it is a byproduct of colonialism. And so if colonialism is the root cause of this disease of the system, then decoloniality is the antithesis. It's the remedy. And so taking that formulation, I was able to program Justice AI to really solve for that issue for the first time ever in life. We now have an AI that gives language to and amplifies CRT and critical race theory and all of these things and decoloniality in a way that nobody's ever seen before. And so it's almost like bringing your college level core studies at the palm of your hands.
Makes sense. This is remarkable. And this is the stuff that needs to happen now, especially where we're at. But let's take it back to the beginning a little bit. So, what inspired the creation of Justice AI and the DIA framework? And what problems were you ultimately trying to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was doing the beta testing for ChatGPT, I was asking it questions through the lens of an activist to see if it understood, like, what the fight really is about, right? Like, what is it that we know and what is it that we don't know? Um, and just the fact that it didn't understand a lot of it told me everything I needed to know about how these systems are programmed. They're all programmed through a Eurocentric Western framework. And for those who are listening who perhaps have no idea what any of this means, basically your ChatGPT scrubs data from all over the internet that, if we think about it, has all been popularized through what we call the global north. So it's the European and North American perspective of the world. And what happens is it leaves out all the voices from people from, Asia, Africa, Middle East, and all of these social constructed borders that we have, and these perspectives that we're not taking under consideration because these AIs are programmed to believe that Western data is the be all. And that's a huge issue. And so, yeah, so in order to solve for this, I realized that right now AI companies fix bias by looking at it as a bug in the system, as something that just happens every now and again. And they try to say, well, we don't know where bias comes from, but they don't want to admit that it's all colonial data. And so, in order to fix the issue, we had to rebuild an AI from the ground up meaning that the intelligence couldn't come just from Western-centric data. It had to come from people who never had a seat at the table. And so the reason I collaborated with over 560 people of the global majority, people from all over the world, indigenous nations in Maori, Afrocentric, Latin-centric, decolonial specialists, they each contributed over 30 years of their data to the data set that we were building. And so we've collectively over time built the world's first decolonial data set. And so how Justice AI works is that it scrubs, I programmed it into ChatGPT on purpose,
Mhm.
right? Because it has the most biased data set. So I wanted to decolonize the biggest data set, but also needed an MVP product to show to people to say, look, this is not only possible, but this is what we're doing with it, right? And um, so what happens is Justice AI, you use it just like ChatGPT. You ask a question about race or history or whatever, politics. It scrubs the data using Western centric information, the biased information. It scrubs all of that data to give you the answer. And then it reverts to the decolonial data set on the back end that we programmed. And it identifies the bias in that data set in real time. It deconstructs it and it reformulates it. So if
Wow.
a user asks something like, why is Africa poor? Most people don't even know that that question in itself is super biased because it's assuming that Africa was born poor, right? But Justice AI will immediately say, let's pause, let's reformulate that question. You know, Africa was never poor. It's the richest country in the or the continent in the world, but it was made poor. And then it goes into the historical details about naming the why, the who, the where, and so it also becomes like an educational moment for the user that also becomes a safe space because it's not going to point the finger at you being like, I can't believe you asked me that question, right? Like
Yeah.
uh, this removes all emotion away from all of it, and it just gives you a very educated, very historically, scientifically proven answer to how it's dismantling the bias in real time.
Wow. Wow. I love it. And this makes a lot of sense, and I think it's very much needed. So you call Justice AI ethical intelligence for future generations. Let's unpack what that looks like in practice. How do you actually define ethical intelligence, and how does it differ from the way most organizations approach AI ethics today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when we talk about ethical intelligence, there's a huge difference that I try to educate my audience with into understanding that there's a massive difference between being conditioned to believe a lie versus being educated on an actual truth. And what happens in our society, we inherit the system of white supremacy, which white supremacy is a system. It has nothing to do with identity because we're all programmed into the system that we've inherited. But we're conditioned and indoctrinated to believe these things from birth. We don't have a choice. We are born into the situations that we're born in. We're conditioned to believe these lies that have been fed to us for generations. And so when we think about ethical intelligence, it is to literally break away from everything we've been taught. And so the tension that people get met with almost immediately is that we are so programmed to identify with what we've been conditioned to believe. And so when we introduce a new framework of ethical intelligence that decolonizes everything we've been conditioned to know, now we're trying to protect what we've been conditioned to identify with, right? And so it challenges everything. And so what happens is ethical intelligence becomes the paradigm shift for everyone, and it's a case by case. At this point, it's case by case. But for
Mhm.
me, in my head, and the way I see it, big picture, is that if every language model was to solve the AI bias problem, and let's just say they adopted my framework, then every AI built moving forward would be an ethical intelligence. The problem is that it would be educating people in things that they have no idea of what's going on. They have never heard these terms. They have never heard these ideals. They believe race is biological. They don't understand that race is a system. And so I don't think the AI companies are ready for that smoke in terms of, they're not ready to take this as a, be leaders in educating. But there's also a very capitalistic side to AI right now that they don't want to do that anyway because it serves their profits. And
Yeah.
so when we talk about ethical intelligence, it's literally about breaking free from our conditioning.
Yeah. Makes sense. I mean, in evangelizing this information, and doing the work will help to educate people. I think that's a start. So, what makes the DIA framework distinct, and how does it help organizations identify and dismantle bias embedded in their data and models? I guess on top of that, if you want to share a little bit about the DIA framework, just kind of, give an overview of that, that might be helpful to the audience as well.
Absolutely. And so, just so that your audience knows as well, the DIA framework is what I call the Decolonial Intelligence Algorithmic Framework. It's at its 13th edition right now. It's published on major sites. And so, if they just Google the DIA framework, the Decolonial Intelligence Algorithmic Framework, they can literally take a look at what this document is. And what I had to do was I had to create this document because it is the driving force behind my AI that tells the AI. It's a multifaceted document that works in a multitude of ways. The first way is that it tells my AI how to decolonize data. It reminds the GPT, like, hey, this is what we're here for. This is what we have to do. This is the mission. But it also checks us and me as the creator, the developer, to say, who are you including at the table for these discussions? Who's approving these messages? Who's like, it's not to say that I'm bringing some random professional to speak for all of mankind, because that is a colonial framework in itself, but it is actually having representation within the data. So the DIA for me tells the GPT how to decolonize using the decolonial data set. And it also is a how-to for AI companies to review, to figure out what are we doing, what processes are we putting in place to create ethical AI on our end. Are we actually training our data on the global south, on parts of the world that typically aren't recognized in Western centric data? Like, are we building a more robust data set? And also, what are we doing with the data? So the DIA framework says data sovereignty is everything. Right now, I protect my IP, which is the 560 plus specialists who contributed that data. That data can't be scrubbed. It can't train the model of OpenAI. It can't train any model, and nobody can go in there and extract that data. But if you were to cite the sources on the Justice AI and say, where are you getting this information from? It'll tell you the specialist and professional from around the world to give
Yeah.
them credit. And so we have to protect data sovereignty. We have to protect the IP that we have, but we also have to have it as this blueprint of how to build a more ethical AI system. And so right now there are many companies around the world that are using it as a how-to to do that. But the other thing about the DIA also is that it acts as my licensable um, contract. If somebody wants to license it for a university, if they want to pay for it to adopt it into their organization to build a more ethical AI, or if they want to adopt it in an institution to teach about ethical AI, they can do that as well. And so I had to create a document and put it in a way that protects my data, the data of everybody else's, becomes a how-to, and then becomes a licensable document, uh, because we are combining decoloniality and a business model for the first
Mhm.
time. So it's like, how do we do that ethically, right? And so this is kind of just that starting point that really opens the doors to these conversations.
Got it. Got it. Makes sense. So help me understand, because you said your goal isn't to reform broken systems, but to expose and rebuild them. Can you share an example of how Justice AI has helped an organization transform its approach to equity or bias mitigation?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Um, I'm a firm believer that we can't reform the system that we have inherited if we are unable to come to terms with the fact that we're all under occupation under a white supremacist system. right? Again, this has nothing to do with an identity. This is just a system that we've inherited. And if we can't come to terms with that globally, then we're never going to be able to reform it. So what this entire project, what this entire AI is forcing is that we look at how do we rebuild something new, right? And so when an organization takes this, when they adopt Justice AI, they can't operate under the same oppressive systems that they've constantly been operating under. So it's asking an organization to completely transform their their ethical stance and their culture that they're building from within. For example, excuse me, a large insurance company who's they're headquartered in the southern United States in Georgia. Can't say their name. They were having issues with diversifying their sales team,
Mhm.
right? And so we took a look at their framework and how they operate and what their sales platform looks like. And it was all commission based, and all of their salesmen were white. And what they weren't culturally competent enough to understand is that their audience and their clientele was predominantly African American in the South, and so they had no real way to connect with their base that they're trying to sell this insurance to. Especially when you have an all white salesman team, no offense to them, and they understood that this was kind of something that was lacking, um, but also they adopted Justice AI to figure out, well, how can we diversify our sales team? What do we have to do to make sure that we make this position that we're trying to create ethical, which meant that they had to pay their insurance agents moving forward, meant that they had to have like a 3 month window of pay before it was going to switch to commission or whatever they decided to do. But it also gave them ways to engage the community, and ways to understand the local realities of what's happening in their cities, and so that they could really focus on, instead of me just coming to you and offering an insurance sales pitch, like what do I really need to do to connect with you as a community member, as somebody who's going through it in society? How do we educate ourselves to understand how the systems are impacting all of us, right? And so that's just one way to do it. Eventually, they diversified their sales team. They changed their pay structure. Like, it was immense change just from a sales perspective. But think about what happens when you adopt something like Justice AI into HR. And now, HR doesn't have an HR department, right? They don't have anybody that they can go to. So they're the be all of decision making. But if they don't have this ethical framework in an HR system, then you are allowing a lot of shady stuff to happen, right? I was the byproduct of HR shenanigans myself. And so a lot of organizations are taking Justice AI to look at the way their systems analyze applications, and how their AIs are biased with picking up on African American names versus, or foreign names versus white names, and all of these things. And the AIs themselves are built on bias, so they automatically discredit names that don't fit Eurocentric names or
Yeah,
frameworks. And so this is, we're talking about something that literally will transform organizations' cultures from the inside out.
absolutely. And I think you're spot on there. And you kind of hit on my next question, which was getting into hiring algorithms and also healthcare models. The biases takes on many forms. So currently, where do you see the most urgent need for accountability right now?
Mm. Yeah, and that's a fantastic one too. I think if what I'm looking at is accountability within organizations who right now I take a look at organizations who struggle the most with lawsuits, annual lawsuits, from anywhere between misgendering an employee to allowing a racist email to go through organizations, having racist leadership, who's really affecting the culture of their work and just doesn't care. Um, this is costing organizations billions of dollars. And so, even outside of an ethical lens, this is a mitigation tool that is just needed, because when you adopt it to mitigate bias, whether you're checking a box or not, whether the goal for you is just to make more money or not, adopting a tool like Justice AI allows you to do the work regardless, because you're just doing the ethical work. And over time, whether you believe in it or not, it's literally it's not conditioning, it's educating people on how to just do better, right? And so right now, within organizations who are struggling with billion-dollar lawsuits, and also to the medical community, 100%, there's medical bias all over the place, and there's a lot of lack of training data. And so I'm going to share with you just really quickly a case study. My very first case study was in Denver, Colorado. I had just published about Justice AI, and a dermatologist in Denver had messaged me on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, I just saw this post you made about AI and bias." And he is like, "Let me just share my story." He said, "I'm an older white gentleman here living in Denver, and I've been a dermatologist since the 1960s. He said, "And I can tell you that our population is diversifying more than ever before, and we are not actually properly trained enough to better serve our diverse communities because we just don't have the data. And right now I have this elder African-American woman and an elder Indian woman who have these skin conditions, and I don't really know what to do with them because I keep misdiagnosing them." And there was nothing that this man can go to on Google or on YouTube or talk to his buddies or his community to say, where are we actually missing the mark here? Because they're missing the mark too. And so he invited me to bring Justice AI to conduct an AI bias audit on his documentation. We started with his intake forms, his policies and procedures, all of the processes and the questions that they ask diverse, customers. And what we found immediately was that there was nothing specifically designed for diverse populations in terms of questions to ask and conversations to have and an understanding to build with the differences of their diets and their habits of, the cultural habits and all of these things.
Yeah.
And so what Justice AI immediately found was through their intake form, you come in, you have a skin condition, the form asks you, what are you allergic to? What are your allergies, food wise or outside of food? And Justice AI immediately realized that all of the foods listed, because it didn't even give a section for you to just write it in, were all based off Eurocentric diets. And so it didn't take under considerations if you eat fatty foods or oils of specific kinds or spices or any of these things.
Yeah.
And so just something as simple as that, just to say I was able to reformulate it and change it up. Not to say that there are dermatologists out there aren't doing this type of work, but this one surely was not. And so Justice AI offered the new perspective of questions to ask, and perhaps you can give these forms. And it created custom intake forms for the patient specifically based off of their just the conversation to have. Well, what do you normally eat? Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Within 2 weeks, he was able to correct reaction. The case studies are also in my DIA, so if people want to take a look at them. And then the second case study prevented skin cancer for the elder Indian woman based off of what was manifesting for her at her age, given her diet, and also just so many factors that they were unaware of. And so it was that first case study that helped me realize that this was just more than an AI tool, that this is what we were talking about. This is what potential change could look like through an ethical framework when it comes to serving our communities that have been historically excluded for so long.
Absolutely. I mean, that's remarkable. And, it's always great to hear those stories because, this is the reason I got into the healthcare technology space in the first place, to really help to drive change and help people. So with what you're doing and what you're building, I mean, whether it's a ethical layer or a framework for fairness, that's one thing. It's another to get institutions to really embrace it. So let's talk about what that looks like in practice. Going into what I like to call performative DEI to systemic reconstruction. Um, you've been very clear that DEIBA isn't a checklist; it's a compass. So what does that mean in practice for leaders building technology or organizations today? When you walk into a company that's ready to do the work, what are the first conversations you have to separate intent from impact?
That is a phenomenal question. Right now, the organizations that are adopting it for sure are social impact organizations, smaller social impact companies, DEI companies, consultants, people who are in the space who go into bigger spaces and provide this lens of ethics to these organizations. Um, I think for me, the most important portion of this conversation is to help myself have a conversation with these organizations to identify where they are in their understanding of what ethics actually is. Help me understand, what the questions really go like this: what do you know about ethics today in terms of not only the services that you offer as an organization, but the systems that you're building and adopting as well? Like, are you asking the right questions when you're adopting a new vendor, right? Or are you just willy-nilly because it's saving you tons of money? Like, right, when we adopt these tools that save us a lot of money, a lot of times we're not even thinking of the ethical component behind it, of how it's operating. And so we're perpetuating mounds of harm in the systems that we adopt, and the questions we don't ask, and in the ideas that we don't inherit. And so when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility, that has to be a foundational framework in how we revolutionize and transform our inside cultures within our organizations. Because now we're talking about making sure we have a diverse set of employees, workers, and policies that suit and meet their needs. Equity for our those who identify as women and those who identify as trans, and what have you. And then looking at the neurodivergent side from the accessibility, because it's, disability looks out more than just physical, right? We're disabled in so many different types of ways, and people don't understand and don't even treat neurodivergence from an ADHD or dyslexic perspective as a disability today. So all of these lenses have to be adopted, and this is why adopting something like Justice AI is a no brainer, because it actually gives you language to how to formulate next steps to really make sure that you are impacting every single community member that comes into your workspace as either an employee or a customer.
Absolutely. And it makes a lot of sense. And to the audience, just shifting for a moment here, I recently penned a white paper on ethical AI and was able to leverage some insights from Christian. So again, thank you for that, Christian, for helping out with your overview on that. I think that was very helpful to drive some of the direction and add some additional context. So I think because this is very important work. I mean, and going back to what you were saying, your goal is not to make power comfortable, but to make liberation unavoidable. How do you help leaders embrace that level of discomfort constructively?
Mm, what a powerful question. A lot of times, I think that this is, I said it earlier, just a few minutes ago, this is a really becomes a case by case scenario, right? I have to meet leaders with where they're at. There's some leaders who, whether they're white, black, Latino, Asian, they know what's up with the system. They understand the work. They come in swinging. They're like, "Yep, nothing makes me uncomfortable about this. I know that this needs to be done. Let's talk about it, X, Y, and Z." But then you have a lot of individuals who, for the first time, are really being confronted is the wrong word, but they feel confronted. They feel
Mm,
like this is very much in their face. This is very much challenging everything that they know. And as we know, as a collective, your audience listening and you, we know that we deal with a lot of people in positions of power who get stuck in their ego. And they get stuck in this reality that if I don't know something, and now I have this guy coming in here offering something that's completely going over my head, now my ego tells me that I have to posture, I have to shut it down because it doesn't make sense. And I'm going to ask the questions to do all the things. And so I have to be ready for those moments. And I have to be ready to just say, hey, 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 give me 10% of that ego and I'll give you something in return. I promise. But just stick with me, right? And then I have to figure out in the moment where the tension is coming up. What is coming up for you as an individual, as a leader in your organization? Because this is an opportunity for you to also grow as a CEO, a CTO, an HR manager, a DEI manager, for you to really just sit with yourself and let's just go there. Let's go from a therapeutic side to
Yeah.
really discuss what's happening, right? Because it's in those conversations that I'm able to identify in real time, like, okay, I understand why you believe this and this and this, but let's take a look at it from this perspective. And then it gives me the opportunity to really just help them walk down this path of newness when we're talking about something that seems so over the top. Because when you see it and you hear it and you have the full conversation, then at the end of it, you're like, yeah, that makes sense actually, right? Like, okay, this doesn't feel as uh, icky as it feels inside right now, right? And so I just think that for sure, as a case by case, you really have to look at who you are as a leader, what you're willing to do in terms of your growth, and how you're going to utilize your growth to amplify the work that you do in your organization. Because what a lot of CEOs also miss the mark on is that they feel like, oh, well, I'm brought in here to make more money for the company, no matter what that looks like. But what they're realizing is that bringing in ethical frameworks just amplifies your profits 100%. The numbers are out there. And so it's not about what's my ROI and DEI. It's about what's my ROI for just being a decent leader and a good human being, right? So these are the conversations that I tend to have more often than not.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I can see those conversations, obviously going a number of ways because how deep do you really want to get into where the bias stems from and those types of things? Because it can get a little tricky. But,
Of course.
given your background and experience, it sounds like you're able to navigate those pretty well. So for organizations genuinely ready to evolve, what does systematic reconstruction actually look like?
Mm, yeah, it could look a multitude of ways because the reality I also understand and that I have to help organizations understand is that not every organization uses AI, right? And so, what does adopting an ethical AI look like if you're running an organization that doesn't have any automated services? If you're not looking to automate services, maybe you're so anti AI because you understand the issues with it. And so it looks a multitude of ways for organizations who are ready to make that change. What I always offer Justice AI as is a co-creation tool that you can use where it expands your brilliance, it expands your own personal ethics, but it gives you language and how to do it. And so whether you're using it to conduct AI bias audits so that you can literally reformulate your policies and procedures from the inside out, because let's admit it, our policies and procedures are filled with Eurocentric bias, right? That impact our employees day in and day out. They impact our customers and they impact how we all of the things. And so having a system that can literally audit and say, this is not serving your customer, this is not serving your employees, this policy right here is actually detrimental to this community, to this the people who look and live this way. That's a humongous addition to have into an organization, because ultimately, no matter how no matter what this looks like, the question should be is how can I make the people that work in within my organization and the people that we serve through our products, how could we make them feel heard, seen, respected, loved, and cherished, and really a part of the culture that we're trying to build? You hear a lot of times we're saying, oh, we have the best culture, the best corporate culture. A lot of times that's just a lot of empty air, right? And so this is putting your money where your mouth is, and this is really leading with that purpose-driven mission.
Spot on, definitely. So I want to shift a little bit to the future because your work is about more than auditing AI. It's about reimagining how technology itself can carry culture forward. Let's talk a little bit about the future, coding memory, culture, and liberation. You said basically, quote unquote, I've built AI that remembers our ancestors. What does that mean on a technical and even spiritual level?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, this is where the decolonial component comes into play. Well, we have to remember what the world was like before colonization. This is where these conversations happen with developers in a way that they've probably never had any of these conversations, right? So I juggle this duality of educating my audience and my customers with education on ethics and decoloniality, and of course, AI. And so both carry so much misinformation, both carry a lot of historical and scientific weight. And the challenge for me is, how do I mesh that and blend that into a deliverable package where I can say, hey, not only is this safe, let me explain to you where this comes from. Let me also show you the historical data, the scientific data, the social science data, the decolonial data. Let me show you and pinpoint the authors that this comes from. When we're talking about programming something that honors our ancestors, we have to understand who our ancestors were. And so that is a conversation within itself as well.
Yeah.
And so it's never going to be just an easy, like, yeah, I get it, I'm going to adopt it. This really helps the developers and users and everybody involved really take a look at not only what did my ancestors look like, what did your ancestors look like, and what did your ancestors look like, and how did they operate? Because all of those voices matter, and all of those ways of being and practices matter. And if we're able to connect with those communities specifically to gather data, to protect their data through data sovereignty, to program it into whatever you're building, then your tool is just going to be astronomically different right from the inception, right? So that Genesis portion of it, it has to have this intentional programming of the voices that have never been heard before, that are out there, but they're not given us, the limelight.
Yeah.
And so this is what we're talking about when we're talking about building tools for the future that remembers our ancestors, because that decolonial piece is working outside of colonial frameworks that we've inherited, and that's where that missing element is. This is the fix, if you will, is to introduce this framework from a completely brand new light.
I love it. I mean, I think it's important stuff, and it totally redefines the way that we should be approaching and thinking about some of this development as we move forward. I think it's very important, especially as we're shifting as a society and a culture. And speaking of culture, so how can culture, oral history, and even collective memory inform the way we design intelligent systems?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think we have to take a look at who defines intelligence first and foremost, uh, because when we go through that rabbit hole, uh, again, we're conditioned to believe certain voices matter more than others, and so adopting a diverse cultural mentality, uh, it says through culture we can absorb and collect and curate knowledge and brilliance from around the world in ways that we've never had before. So, and forgive me because I'm trying not to go into a tangent so that I can answer your question again. So, I think culture just plays the biggest component to building these systems. Um, and again, the question for me that I have for organizations is, what does that look like for you? What are you willing to do as an organization to reach out to these different cultures, right? And to figure out how you can adopt frameworks that look completely different than what we've been conditioned to believe should look like, right? Again, this is all about paradigm shifting. This is all about changing the way that we see everything, but it doesn't take much to make the change needed. It's just a matter of having the right conversations, to have the right explorations, to really, and then just to see where we're at as leaders, to say, okay, what am I willing to do? What am I even willing to understand? And how can this make sense for me, and how I can translate this into the system? This is why having Justice AI, again, not just to keep uplifting my own product, but I built it for these reasons, so that we could have these really crucial conversations that um, leave so many of us in the dark with, because it's complicated. And I understand that we're all limited in the way that we think when we've been hyper focused on just this one linear path. And so uh, as this tool as a co-creative tool allows us to ask these questions for ourselves, because I think they look different for everybody as well.
I think you're spot on. I mean, you hit it right there because most of us, if not all of us, have been preconditioned to see things a certain way. I mean, even when
100%.
you look at a commercial, I mean, you're looking at this through your lens that you've been preconditioned to look at it from.
Yes.
So it gets very deep. So I think I mean, I love the work, I love the mission. I think it's amazing. So in the future, what does a decolonized AI future look like in 20 to 30 years from now in your eyes?
Mm. And that's my goal. That framework is about my goal. I've dedicated my whole life to making sure that we decolonize AI once and for all. What that looks like to me is to have an AI that understands and makes no excuse for oppression across the board. People think oppression is a very powerful word and that it has to be a physical manifestation of one person oppressing another, but we oppress each other in so many different ways across communities because we're all the byproduct of the system. And so to have an AI that understands what that looks like and to operate outside of frameworks in which we've been conditioned to operate through since the inception of capitalism, to be able to call these systems out for where they are, to be able to say, hey, this is just, it's not an attack. I see decolonial AI as being a tool that literally guides us and helps us and literally grabs us by the hand to say, hey, 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 let's take this approach because this is better. Here's why, right? And that way, we don't even have to focus on specific language at this point. We just focus on a new system that is reparative and that gives back to communities.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, in that future, what role do you see for communities, especially those historically excluded from technology design, in shaping what comes next?
I honestly believe that there are going to be more educational roles and consultative roles that give people opportunities to come in through because part of this work as well is the educational component. And I think that it's going to allow people who have special interests in social science and decoloniality and understanding oppressive frameworks versus non oppressive frameworks to come in and really learn the field, learn the way that they can educate leaders and come into spaces to adopt ethical tools. Because it's one thing to say, hey, I got an ethical tool, and I can bring it to an organization that has no idea what ethics actually means, right? And so now we're talking about having a consultant that's culturally competent enough, that's savvy enough. That's just one position that I see is going to be amplified over the next several years. Is people who understand the intersection between ethics and technology, which has never been a thing, right? And so this is going to look very different and it's going to be very challenging for a lot of people. And there's no doubt about that. And it's going to take several decades to get where we need to get. But I'm telling you, like, for anybody for all my users out there who already use Justice AI, but organizations, like, once you see it, once you use it, it just makes all the sense in real time, right? And that's all I can really say about it. And so, for the future of AI, I think that there's going to be massive changes in the best way. And I'm going to say this, and I'll end my little stint here. AGI is coming, which is going to be this AI that just thinks on its own, and you won't even have to ask it questions in the traditional sense that we're asking normal GPTs. And so it's going to automatically think for itself. It's going to automatically think about solutions and things of that nature. If you understand that if that's going to happen through a Eurocentric Western data set that is problematic, then we're going to amplify oppression in ways that we've never seen before. So if we can decolonize AI before AGI comes, that's my goal, is that we'll have then a system that automatically has a foundational ethics component that we're not going to have to worry about it acting like some shady,
Mm-hmm.
entity who's going to try to extract and sell you and do this, that, and the other. And so, So that's the ultimate goal of the future of AI for me, is decolonizing it before we get to a more consciousness worthy entity, so that we don't really have to worry about machines pulling a Terminator on us ultimately.
Well, we hope that won't happen, but I think you're spot on. If applying this ethical layer, whether it's, us calling on to an AI or a chat GPT, or, that CGI, proactively doing it on your behalf. If that layer is already in there, then you have a better chance to level set some things.
Mm.
Otherwise, we're in trouble. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so I think you hit a great point there. So with that in mind, how do you personally sustain hope and focus while building technology that confronts deep systemic inequities?
I think there's a big problem. I mean, there's a big, not a problem. I think there's a big relief that comes with this concept of, I think the more that we know, the more we're able to just understand what's happening, big picture in the world. I adopt a couple of frameworks for myself. The work that I do is not intended to change anybody's mind. I say that first and foremost when I come into rooms and boardrooms. So my goal isn't to change your mind. That's a fool's game, right? My purpose is, I call myself a seed planter. If I can plant enough seeds, if your soil is good enough, then my seeds are going to blossom and bloom into something that it's inevitable.
Yeah.
But if your soil is so tarnished and filled with roots, and it's so hard to get to the nutrients and to my seeds aren't going to do anything for you. And so right off the bat, I have to understand that our jobs aren't to convince anybody. We can't convince anybody of anything they're not ready to hear, understand, or know. So that alone takes so much pressure off my shoulders, because I meet you where you're at. If you're not ready for this message, cool, I'm not your guy. And I'm okay with that. Right. The ultimate thing, and I think this is true for everybody, is that we have to remember, especially as entrepreneurs, as people in this business, your product and your services aren't going to be for everybody, for sure. And you have to be all right with that. Right. We're conditioned again in this capitalistic world to say we need everybody as a customer. We need everybody as a client. That I don't operate in that lens. Right. And so that alleviates a lot of that stress for me, because the goal isn't to convince. I see what the work looks like when I plant a seed, and already 6 months later, it's blossomed into a massive tree that's just making unbelievable work. The other thing about it too is, I protect my peace. I know that this message is something that challenges the very fabric of who we are and how we identify. And when you understand that that's what's happening, then I can either help you walk through it and give you the social scientist explanation of what's happening with your amygdala and your hippocampus, because this is all brain work.
Yeah.
Um, or I could just wish you well and just say, when you're ready, I'm here. And if you're never ready, I just wish you the best.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's the appropriate approach. And just love the work that you're doing, and
Thank you.
moving towards the last portion of our segment, which I like to call leadership, legacy, and call to action. Um, you've described your mission as creating ethical intelligence for future generations. What would you want those generations to inherit from your work?
Mm. I think the ultimate thing is I want our future generations, me being a father of four, my kids are the main driver of everything that I do. I imagine the future that they're inheriting today and that they're playing a part in. When I develop this tool, as I develop it and it continuously grows and the work continues to grow, my hope is that future generations inherit a system unlike anything we've ever seen. Something that, and I think we're seeing it now with the political side of things too. We're having a bit of an awakening, right? I look at systems more than just AI, but systems that we've inherited through politics and through the way we've been conditioned to see each other. COVID was a perfect example of that with Black Lives Matter. I think the world had a little bit of a racial awakening. We, as people of color, we understand, we've known the realities of our existence, but I think the world got to actually see what that is actually like. And so I feel like the future that I hope that our future generations inherit is a system that is so aware of what's happening that helps them guide each decision that they make into a more ethical stance without having to get too in the weeds about what that looks like or all of that, but just that having a more culturally competent ethical framework that they can inherit from birth, so that there's no conditioning, that leaves any of that out, if that makes sense. And I think it's going to get better and better with the more we normalize these conversations in tech, especially.
That is true. That is true. I completely agree. I would also ask, what advice would you give to technologists or executives who want to start building with justice at the core, not as an afterthought?
Mm, that's a really good question. I would simply ask that developers and people in positions of power and organization take a moment, especially if they hear this conversation, to ask themselves, what does this actually look like for them, and what are they willing? How far are they willing to go? Because a lot of this not only takes leading with conviction, it takes a level of certainty and understanding that these are just facts.
Yeah,
Ethics, if you bring the receipts, are just facts. And you have to be ready for pushback. You have to be ready to speak to your passions and purpose. I think a lot of this goes beyond technology, and it really just has a foundation about who we are as leaders, as people with a voice, people who, and this is hard, as you know. There are a lot of individuals who, again, if you have an ego and you are uncertain and you have those insecurities that really bite in the back of your head, then this isn't going to be the mission for you, because you're going to have tons of pushback and flack, and it's going to activate things within people that they've never been ready to face and deal with. And if you're not ready for that, then you have to ask yourself, what are you willing to do to adopt something like this? Because it's not just a check box.
absolutely, absolutely. I think you're right on, my friend. And finally, how can listeners engage with or support the work of Justice AI?
I appreciate that offering. What I always tell people is you can subscribe to it. I have a $20 a month option that anybody can subscribe to try it. It's $20 a month. If you have ChatGPT Plus, where you pay $20 a month, ultimately you're paying $40 a month for an ethical AI system, which is pennies to the dollar. It's the most affordable I can make it, honestly. Um, and if you can't afford it, ask an organization to see if they can adopt it for you as an employee, things of that nature. Or you could just pay $20 a month and use the free version, which gives you limited things. But justiceaigpt.ca is the website. But also organizations are inviting me to build custom GPTs for them, powered by Justice AI, which that's where the value really comes in for organizations. Is I customize this AI for you that understands your company's vision, mission, and purpose, and it's powered through that ethical framework. And so it just helps transform those internal cultures from within. Of course, that costs way more, but organizations can afford it.
Definitely, but it's the socially responsible thing to do, obviously, with especially with everything where we're at. So,
Yes, sir.
Christian, this has been one of the most thought-provoking conversations we've ever had on the Game Changers podcast. Your vision of technology rooted in memory, justice, and liberation challenges all of us to think differently. Not just about what we build, but why we build. I think that's key here. So, to our listeners, I encourage you to explore Christian's work at justiceai.co and learn more about the movement towards ethical, decolonized technology. Until next time, stay curious, stay courageous, and keep building a future where innovation and justice move together. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you
Talk
so
to you
much.
soon.